Hello, I hope you all are well in this time of pandemic. I welcome you from the association and all association to the activity that we are developing within the framework of the second set of conferences of positive synergies on high capacities and gifted people. This year talking about consequences of the non-identification or the identification only as a mere label. It's my honor to introduce you Carmen Pomar Tojo with her conference called Matías Skateboard, the Iceberg Effect and the High Capacities. It has very much been said about high capacities, but very little about the inside of these people, their feelings, their emotions, their interpretation of the world, and of how they design their environment to feel safe. A very interesting approach. And about this, we're going to listen to Carmen Pomar Tojo. She was born in Santiago de Compostela. She's got a PhD in psychology, student to Joseph Renzulli and Sally Rice. She was also postdoc student in Virginia University, teacher to psychology in La Rioja and Santiago. She also teaches in the educational psychology master. She's also leading the unit for educational attention in high capacities in Santiago since 2009. She also directs the projects Talento 3.0 and PITES from the Foundation Barrio de la Maza. She leads the project Emocionarte in the Jove Foundation. She's professor to the Master of Emotional Education, has published the Magic Triangle of the High Capacities for Galician teachers, and she has also published different articles and chapters around intelligence, motivation, high capacities, and creativity. She has been counselor for education, universities, and professional training, and she's currently member of parliament in the regional parliament of Galicia and keeps working in the educational policies and emotional intelligence. It's a great honor that at last we can have Carmen with us, because in other occasions it hasn't been possible. It's a great honor to have you here. Thank you for your help. I hope you all like this conference. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a great honor being here with the Enol Association family, and of course, with all of you who are going to take part in this short talk about high capacities. This is an invitation that was offered to me many years ago, but we couldn't, for different reasons, talk together. And today it's really a great honor to be here with you. I hope that what I'm telling you and I'm going to explain to you will be of some use and will clear some of your questions. I've decided to name this talk Matías Skateboard, with the subtitles that are probably more familiar to all of you, that it's the Iceberg Effect and the High Capacities. We've talked very much about this iceberg effect with many aspects, with regard to many aspects, but especially we're going to focus on high capacities. I'm going to explain to you first why I've named it Matías Skateboard. Along my presentation, I will try to connect the different ideas that I'm going to share with you on how I perceive high capacities and some of those aspects connected to hiding these high capacities. I will connect them, as I said, with the specific cases that I've seen along my almost 20 years of experience, where I've been working with kids, with teenagers, with young adults, and with adults. So this came up because at some point I worked as her psychologist expert in high capacities with a teenager. His name was Matías. I asked permission to the family and to himself to give you his real name because I think this, when we build a story and we invent the names, we lose some point of that empathy. We lose connection to the case. We tell it with a different intensity. So this is Matías, is a case of a typical case of a teenager with high capacities but with a low performance at school. So low that at some point during his secondary studies, it could have been a terrible failure, we could say. Matías in the primary, that's when I met him, he had a tutor, specifically in the 6th grade, and he could understand and could have this needed sensitivity to this case and this particularity that Matías has, that is probably very familiar to you working in these areas or who have kids with high capacities. They're very good in some areas, but very mediocre in others, or at least not showing their capacities and talent in other areas. I believe, I'm sure that Matías is an amazing potential artist. I think he can get far, but he can do so if we can switch his motivation. When he was in the 6th grade, as well as creating an enriching program where we took his talent, his artistic talent, and his huge intelligence, visual intelligence, and his creativity to stimulate him in other areas that he was not very keen on. It was not just that he wasn't keen on them, he didn't work at all, such as in mathematics. And this tutor could manage to make him see that when we draw, that when we design a building, when we design an object, when we're trying to take a picture, everything behind it, everything around it, it has to do very much with mathematics. So when connecting these two areas, Matías started to be highly motivated in the maths. Jumping or the step going to the secondary school was very difficult, and the first years were disastrous. Matías has high capacities that potentially could be a genius, could be doing amazing things, but he needs that courage to get there. We've got this sentence here: a genius is a talent set to flames by courage. Until you can't find the way to sparkle that energy, the engine just won't work. One of the times that Matías failed many subjects, I don't know if it was in the first term, the second term, his parents had promised him a super skateboard last model, well, because he really liked skating, and with the results that he got, that prize never came. But Matías decided to build it himself. He replicated exactly the skateboard he wanted to get from his parents, with more basic materials, of course, in a more domestic way, but he bought little by little the different pieces he needed. He bought the board, he cut it to shape, he drew it, he designed it, he bought the wheels, he bought the paint, and he showed his parents that he was not too keen on these type of motivation and prizes, because they had promised a skateboard, but if he was not getting it, he would make it himself. This is also a very interesting topic related to high-capacity students, and why not with high-capacity adults that are working. I don't like leaving this high-capacity topic to the kids or to teenagers, because it seems that when they're 13, 14, 15, 16, or come on, let's be generous, if we go up to 18 years old, it seems that these capacities disappear. And it's not like this. During my last years, I've been working very much with adults, and there's still high capacities in these adults, of course. It's very difficult to motivate them because positive and negative reinforcing that are the basic rule for conditioning and motivating the response and provoking a response or making this response to disappear. This doesn't work very well with high capacity people. So what for a kid or a teenager with high capacity, with average capacities, can be a gift, can be an award, can work as a motivating for a teenager with high capacities. Doesn't necessarily have to be so. And as I'm telling you, in the case of Matías, I insist, if he couldn't get it one way, I'll get it in another way because I have my own resources. I think this is the starting point of what I want to tell you. How there are things that we can't see, that don't come up to the surface, and with the right stimulus, with the right trigger, bloop, they suddenly work. The iceberg, tip of the iceberg grows. I'm going to try to connect all the aspects that I'm going to talk to you about with this exceptional situation that we're living after a year of pandemic. We've talked about many groups and many collectives that for certain reasons were how they were coping with lockdowns and without being in contact with other social environments, but we haven't spoken very much what happens with students with high capacities. How have they coped with it? How have they coped with the pandemic, with lockdowns? What problems have they had? I am currently in an exceptional situation because I'm doing other things, but I still have received along this year phone calls from people who have trusted me when I was actively working in the unit in the university. And they have told me problems, real problems from their kids and from themselves connected with this coronavirus topic and with all this situation, this complex and unusual situation that we're living that seems to be coming to an end, but that has had a huge impact on some subjects. I don't like talking about subjects because it sounds very experimental, but I think it compiles boys, girls, teenagers, young adults, and adults. So I'll use it as a general word to compile all these vital stages that a person goes through. I'm going to try to talk about things that we don't hear about very often. I hope this can clear up some questions that we might not hear so much about. Once I got this post, this advert, this picture. It was in my letterbox at home, and this was the image. Of course, that it has the publicity around it that it doesn't make any sense for you to see. But as you can see, even I see useful professional sources in the publicity that I get, the adverts. So I took a picture at home. It's not a very good one, but I think it does represent what I want to explain to you. It was publicity around batteries. It was like a robot, a human-shaped robot. And at the top it said superpower. And if you can see, it says batteries from €1. And this made me think that this is the idea and the image that society probably has around high-capacity subjects. They are people, whatever age, that have a long-lasting battery. And the fact that they have high capacities makes them be superior, having an exceptional resistance, much higher to the rest of the people. These are stereotypes that still stays, still remains in different contexts, and specifically in the academic world, is not doing us any favor. It's not doing any favor to people with high capacities, because it's a misconception. It makes you think that they can cope with anything, that their energy is everlasting, that they will never get tired, and they can hold anything. I think the Spanish expression superdotado, this super gifted, we're increasing the potential, it's intensifying the name that comes with it. And it makes us think that these kids are very special, or these people are very special in the way that they can take anything on board. And things are not like this. Reality of us who work in this area, in this topic, and the families, the relatives of teenagers or kids with high capacities, we see, and we see the experience, we have experienced that we run out of those batteries, and probably very more frequently than people would imagine and would expect. They are not always loaded of batteries. They don't have a super habit, an excess, a surplus of energy. And that surplus of energy could be there, but it's hidden. And what we have to do is to find that on switch. And we have to help them switch on that button, because if we don't find the button, no matter how many batteries that machine has, it won't even work. I don't know if you have noticed that sometimes batteries would just run out of energy without being using them. That can also happen to our kids. When we have a huge, high capacity, intellectual capacity, but that we're not using properly. So we need to switch them on in the appropriate way. And here's our big iceberg. It's very recurrent, but it's a very common image, but it doesn't lose its validity, and it's a great metaphor. It's true that what we see in a student with high capacity is very, very little. And not all icebergs are the same, but some of them have very small tip and a huge part at the bottom, underneath the water, under the surface. And I've realized that out of the 4 or 5 that I've been working with, but I'm not a clinical therapist, but just those I've been working with as voluntary work that I've been doing for my whole life, and I like working with them further and helping them. I've noticed that this has increased. The pandemic has made this hidden eyes, this part of the eyes that is under the surface has increased. It's a natural progress of freezing that it's made them. This part has simply grown, probably because they've had less resources available to them, less situations that could have helped them channel this energy and channel these capacities, this different way of interpreting their world and their situation, and probably because an exceptional perception of exceptional situation is even harder to cope with. I've found that they have a special sensitivity for topics like this one that we're living, and because they have a special availability or a special situation to overwhelm themselves or get overloaded with a situation such as an unknown virus, that it can be actually fascinating for these minds that want to know it all, that are curious for all. This hyperload, this overload, this hyper worries for reality has they've paid a toll for this. I've seen teenagers that are really worried and are really concerned around this topic in general terms. Teenagers that have no high capacities, but in the 4 cases that I've worked with high capacities along this year, the ones I've connected with, they have shown a special vulnerability to everything that was going around them, everything and all the information they were receiving through different channels. When we have an iceberg, we can do 2 things. We can go against it and crash, or surround it or border it. Or in this case, this boat would even have the option of going under the ark, with a risk that the upper part of that door could fall over it. So not all subjects with high capacities are equal. They don't all face their reality the same way. Some of them are more intense. They just go against whatever they have in front of them. Some of them are more analytical and they deepen further. And then there's some random ones that just go around it, and what they try to do is not to be aware of what's going on with them. And this is something that I've also seen during this year of pandemic. So as well as talking about the iceberg effect, it's very interesting to know how they assume that side, how they accept it, how we see that side, that visible side, and how they assume, accept, and manage that hidden side. Sometimes their environment doesn't help them. They need to manage it themselves. And I think we need to talk more about that hidden side rather than to the one we can see, because we've talked about we talk very often, there's lots of research being done on this visible side, this tip of the iceberg, characteristics or the demands or the needs of high-capacity subjects make to this environment, the surrounding environment. How do they let themselves be seen and perceived, and the needs that are implicit to that way of showing themselves, that way of being naked to the world. But what about those things that they don't let us see? What about those things that are hidden and that they don't know how to manage? That's a bit the story, Matías' story and his skateboard story. And that's a story of many other kids I've worked with and kids that I've helped and teenagers that I've helped. There's a book, a headline book, that it's The Little Prince Essential is Invisible to the Eye. That's a huge metaphor again to understand the iceberg capacity, the iceberg effect in the high capacities, because very often what we see is not helping us work and is not helping us intervene and manage and help and support these students. But the essential, that is the core side to it, the axis of these high capacities is not seen to the eye. It's invisible to the eye. And what is essential for families and experts is to go into this side. It's invisible, but it's key. It's the clue to tell you how you have to work with these subjects, or how you have to live with these subjects. We have always talked about high capacities with the cognitive profile. Well, IQ, it's the top topic with high capacities. What are the variables that are involved in the high capacities, and what cases we see? 30 years ago, high capacities, it was just everything and anything where everybody would go into with so many situations. But nowadays, high capacities are heterogeneous. I get quite annoyed when they try to make it homogeneous and making one single profile in high capacities and people believing that every high capacity person is the same and that all realities are the same. I'm not going to go deep into this. This is a very much known topic, but it is very important for us to understand that there are very many variables around high capacities and that there are different cases in this group. We cannot try to, we can't expect them to show the same way. They will not have the same objective. We cannot quantify, and this is something that I remarked, I highlighted very much when I had educational responsibilities. We published a protocol, a very updated protocol about high capacities, because it's very difficult sometimes to understand that for an assessment, for a study, for a report, the only essential thing is the number, that IQ number. Getting away from that is very difficult. It is useful information, but it shouldn't be a tool to diagnose, and especially those of us who work in psychology and emotions. Nothing is being told to me with this, just with a number, telling me that Marta has a 139 IQ. That gives me no information to work with her. How can I change the way she's being taught? What can I tell a teacher about how they should be working with her? I want to know what it means for Marta to have an IQ of 39. IQ is information, and it's placing me, this girl, in a group of the population that is a certain interval. And probably, if I know what high capacities are, I will get closer to her. I will be able to make a closer profile. But Marta is not just an IQ. I need to know what impact, how we can translate this 139 into the way she is in her emotional management of situations, in her social abilities. That's what matters to me, to work with her. Human beings, we have 3 types of brain, and this is something that has been studied. I'm simplifying very much, okay? But there's authors that work in neuropsychology who say, neurology, and say that these 3 part development or simplification of the brain is too simple, but it does help us understand that we have 3 different working levels. The area that really differentiates the human brain from other animals is basically that one that has to do with the cortex, with the brain cortex, especially with the neocortex. And if you see, during these years, and especially in the case of high capacities, we have put too much emphasis in this side of the brain, but within this part of the brain, to a smaller part that has much more to do with more analytic side of the brain, the most methodic, systematic, more academic part of the brain. A brain that is more componential, following Stern, following those the most academic side of the actions, and that's the fluid intelligence. But in this brain connected to cortex and the evolution of the brain, of the human brain, there is also another side that hasn't been studied so much. It's the creative side. It's like what allows us to see, to foresee, to even predict something that hasn't been dealt with or hasn't been learned. And that's where people with high capacity people are really amazing at. in this more human, more evolved brain that has to do with the brain cortex, we can't just think that there is a side, a rational side, an analytical side, but there is also a very creative side that we need to study and we need to understand in our kids and teenagers with high capacities. But our brain also has an emotional side, and we very often forget about this one. And if we forget about it generally, because I've been working in emotional intelligence for many years, and I know we have progressed a lot, but not enough, I would say. We've progressed very much in research and theory and training. I was doing a training session the other day for an organization course in company, and I was talking to them about emotionally intelligent teams. And I was telling them that it wasn't evolution, was not aligned with practice evolution, because it seems that we all want to believe and train in emotional intelligence, but we still lack schools and progress in the educational system. And many companies need to go further in this emotional intelligence practice. So we also have a very reactive brain that has to do with our emotions, with our reactions, with our most instinctive reactions. And they have a lot to do with how we shape our emotions. And this is something we don't talk much about in high capacities. And right now, and probably not so much now, but a few months ago, when we were in the second or third wave of the pandemic, and of course under a lockdown, all this in all of us has meant a huge revolution, because and imagine if it's been a revolution for us, imagine for those with high capacities. Some of them haven't managed this very well. Emotionally, they are lacking tools, and they don't know how to process and assimilate and digest this situation and all the information they are receiving, because it's a lot of information and they are absorbing it at high speed. And some others are quite the contrary. They're like the two poles of the continuum. Some others are excessively intensive, and it has affected them up to almost as an illness. And then we have an instinctive brain. This is the most animal brain, the reptilian brain, and it's the one that leads us in a most primary way. But high capacity subjects also have this instinctive side to them, this side that tries to survive, and we don't speak very much about this. We have focused especially in one part of the brain, in the neurocortex brain, and we have forgotten about the other side. And we have to think that the others also have exceptional capacities. Emotional profile, and connecting to what I was telling you before, in high capacities is a very peculiar profile. As I said, it's a continuum that goes from the lack of management and that release of that inner side. They're trying somehow to block that emotional brain that makes them not knowing how to face different situations, to the opposite pole of high intensity, hypersensitivity, hyperexcitability that takes them to the other side, completely to the other side. It makes them be overwhelmed because of soaking all these situations that really impact their emotions. It's an asynchronous profile. It's not balanced. It doesn't work in a balanced way. It's not stable. It's not connected. It's not synchronous. Sometimes it's highly vulnerable. And as I said, it's hypersensitive. I wrote them this some years ago for a conference I had to give for León, for this association in León for high capacities. We're all neighbors, the Northwest. It was some years ago when I wrote it, 3, 4 years ago. But this teenager I'm talking about in this story was one of them who called me during the pandemic to tell me I need help. And said this morning a teenager with high capacities confessed that his best friend was the moon. I know him when he was very little, and sky was his passion. He loved talking stories about meteorites and satellites. Nobody has taken his passion away, but some have managed to take his smile away. He would talk about space travel and running away to the space, to other universes. Is that we talk about how important it is to be different, to keep mystery in the routine. We talk about energy, physical, mental, and cosmic. But we talk about mini worlds that are designed are tailored to one's reality to try to get away from reality. We talk about relations, obligations, dreams, past, futures. This image represents very much what he told me when he was a teenager, his mini worlds and that need of going to that type of oasis out of the world and getting away from the world. Well, Ivan has been one of those people who have contacted me, and he said he's feeling overwhelmed by the pandemic. He was beginning to have complex emotional problems, and he needed help. So see how in a situation like the one we're living, a collective such as the high capacities, teenagers, and kids too, of course, they are especially vulnerable, and how we're not realizing about this. I think quite the contrary. As they have high capacities, they should be able to manage this capacities much better because they've got superpowers. But it's not so. We have to take this very much into account. It's exactly now when they need more help. Their motivational profile, it's very forgotten, very much forgotten, but it's so important. We need to learn about all this. For kids with high capacities, this is what happens. I have so much information surrounding me, so many stimulus, and I just search for refuge under my umbrella. It's a girl in purpose, the drawing that I looked for, because it's more common in girls, but it's even more iceberg. Girls are even more iceberg than boys. You know the relation between gender and hiding of high capacities. What happens is that their motivation follows very different patterns. There's very individual patterns. Very often we find kids with high capacities that are not very motivated, very little motivated actually, because their achievement motivation is influenced by very different elements. The perception of their environment, for example, self-efficacy or efficiency, perception of themselves, and the value of the task they have to do. What do you perceive from your environment? Do you have a positive perception, a negative perception? What's the messages that your environment is sending you? Are they stimulating or are they pushing you down? What are the expectations from your environment? And sometimes you can just really, what you want to do is open your umbrella and forget about everything around you. And what is your self-efficiency perception? Because if you believe in superpowers, you would have a self-efficiency level that is very high. But I have seen kids and teenagers with a self-efficiency level that is appalling. They believe themselves to be they don't have their competencies, they cannot reach what they want. Even I found kids with high capacities that what they do is they hesitate about their capacities. A teenager would tell me, "Are you sure you didn't get it wrong? Didn't you get them wrong? Are you sure that you didn't misunderstand?" I always thought that I was less intelligent, less smart than the rest. Funnily enough, this was another one of those teenagers that has called me during this pandemic, and I'm trying to work with her a little bit through video conference. So in these things, do come up in exceptional situations. And the value of the task. Understanding that what I'm doing makes sense. They always look for the why. What am I going to get out of this? What is this for? Is it relevant at all? Why should I be doing this? What am I going to learn from this? And if we channel all this with a personality that also has its pros and cons, the learning styles, the way they learn, the way they process information, they interpret it, they code it, something that is so important in schooling and academic environments, and that is not so much attention is being paid to it. Well, for students with high capacities is essential. And this is very much connected to that hidden side, that part of the iceberg that is under the surface. How do kids with high capacities learn? That's going to help them. We are going to see there how to teach them. How do they learn? They don't learn differently because they're more intelligent. They learn different because that high capacity has other factors that they're channeling, the others that they're metabolizing. They're processing everything around them. And they see on a wall, instead of the exit label, there's a stain that somebody left with a red felt tip pen when nobody else sees that. How are we going to explain to them things the same way if they're learning differently? That's the element. That's where high capacities clash with the schools, with the environment. Going now to the intervention side. Those of you who know how I work, I trained essentially with Joseph Brantulli, with the three-ring theory, that it then came with enrichment, with a curricular enrichment profile that we're implementing in Galicia, and we're implementing it with public funds. It started with a private foundation, but it somehow, probably because I helped as a counselor for education, I insisted very much to on our government to give us some public funding, and there's currently 40 centers for education, 40 educational centers that are working on this new model. With these models of Renzulli, they are very aligned on the line with what I'm talking to you about. It's very important to know what's the difference they make. That's a big question. And then what we have is that what defines the difference and what somehow shapes the way we have to teach these kids is something that goes further. It's not the IQ 129, 140, 150. This is not relevant in disability to have an IQ of 60. This would be ridiculous. But this has to do with what our adult kids, or those people who have are almost out of their schooling system, and they should be leaders of the world. We've heard so much along this year about science and research, and we've thought, oh no, the potential researchers and potential geniuses for the science, they're kids with high capacities. And not just that, they're social leaders, they're communication leaders. How many problems have we felt with the lack of information, problems in communication? And what makes a high-capacity kid or teenager turn into a leader, into a world leader? So Renzulli's model is also very much aligned in this line. What are the characteristics? What are the features, the nuances that take a kid or an adult with high capacity to go to become a leader in areas of knowledge? Well, their characteristics, their features, virtues, so to say. For example, these optimism, sensitivity, being brave, energy. Remember that first slide, passion, and the direction, that goal vision to be able to see the end. What's our objective? What's our goal? And all this in high capacities, we're working with them properly, when they're properly oriented, when we're accompanying them, when we're guiding them, they do show results. And when we don't do it right, all these potential, these capacities, these abilities, they will never turn into a proactive leadership to change the world. Another aspect that we work with the Renzulli model in the last years is what it has to do with the executive functions. That's also a path we have to walk. It's what we call doing the right thing. I've worked with kids that had an amazing capacity, but they were not capable of putting it in practice, executing from the brain into specific steps, specific actions that they could see the result. I can have the potential, but I may not have the result. What are the keys? What are the clues to have a powerful result? Well, this has a great deal to do with those executive functions and being oriented to action, having the right social interaction. Sometimes this is a lack because in the high capacities, not because they don't want to socialize, but because the environment doesn't favor them to interact in a healthy social way. And very often they don't have the tools and the elements. So it has to be, in Piaget's words, a balance, accommodation and assimilation, that adaptation to the environment where the subject adapts to the environment and the environment to the subject. The altruistic leadership, doing things for others, forgetting a bit about myself, motivations, realistic self-assessment, and something very much connected to empathy, the awareness of others' needs. All this is going to help activate the executive functions and to obtain a positive result. If we only focus in the judicial and the legislative features, in following Stenberg's words, we will never reach an action that will translate into a product, into an impactful product. It's what Renzulli says, the development of the social capital, and it's essential, especially when talking about high capacities in this 21st century, and especially after this whole pandemic we've lived. And I'll finish now with this. With a very small detail that shows in this poster of yours, and I've tried to adapt it to these capacities. And sometimes kids go unnoticed. That butterfly goes unnoticed that defines these activities that you do in Enola Asturias. I think the high capacities process is like the life cycle of a butterfly. When you work with in this topic, metaphors are multiple and they just come to your mind constantly. And I think it's a bit like this. But I will tell you something to finish. When after the egg, we've got the caterpillar and caterpillar to the cocoon and then to the butterfly, there's no stopping there. The butterfly will never be an egg again. It can lay them, but it will never be an egg again. But in the high capacities, this cycle, it's absolutely real. We can get that cocoon to turn into a butterfly, But with a wrong intervention, with the lack of sensitivity and lack of understanding, we can make that butterfly go back to the cocoon and go back to a caterpillar and then go back to the egg. They will be hiding, that caterpillar hides back. So we have to be very, very careful, because a high capacity subject can show amazing wings, and they can cheer our lives, and they can contribute greatly to life. But we can also make them go back, to fold, to hide, and go back to their initial situation. And that's something we don't want. That's not, absolutely not desirable. And that's what we're working on, everyone involved in this topic. And of course, all the people that from Enol, you are working for more and more people to work in this line, are aware of what high capacities are and demystify what this topic has to do. Let's go for those butterflies. Thank you for your opportunity. You have, I'm here available to all you in this email, and Dolores Palacios can also give you this same link. Thank you very much.